a.m. here, United States East Coast, coming to you from Maine, where spring is sprung and the hens are being nice today. Lord willing, they'll keep with that. I want to thank everyone who supports the program, as always, all of our fans, the many people who are purchasing Surviving the Fall of America. Lord knows it's a timely book if ever there was one, so go check that out if you haven't done so already, and be sure to leave a review if you do over there at Amazon. It helps out a lot. I want to also thank everyone who supports the program through Venmo, CBC PRV, P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739, and everyone who has been praying for us, of course. That's the most important thing. Lord knows that, we want to have them look out. We need you guys looking out for us and praying for us. The Lord keeps us at heart. I'm sure He will. Just a little tired today. I got up really early. I wanted to do a show earlier, but today's just had terrible flow. I sometimes say this phrase. People don't know, just one of Thomisms. But when a day has bad flow, it's because you have plans to do things and just a whole bunch of other things come up. And otherwise, I would have been doing this an hour and a half ago. But hey, it happens, and we roll with the flow. That's what we do. And now it's warmer and hotter, which the clouds went away, which is why you see me wearing the sunglasses. Although, people always think I wear the sunglasses when we do conspiracy type programming. And today we're going to get into one that's a little bit like it, because what we're going to talk about is unorthodox economics, and I'm going to talk about getting woke or going broke, and I want to explain the way the economy actually functions versus the way people think it should function. Just give people a couple minutes to filter in here as we go forward with the program, but I continue to keep a close eye on the supply shortages that are ongoing. Basically, it just seems like there's like a whole bunch of it's a gritty supply chain, right? So there's things that are not getting through that need to get through. There's too much of certain things that are being offloaded, not enough of others, and there's a labor problem that's resulting from a lot of that. Especially inflation's making it worse at the low end labor. The people who make a lot of money have jobs that really aren't essential, and the people who do the jobs that actually keep the economy moving don't actually make very much. And that's something you begin to realize. I mean, because worth is treated as based on scarcity, and labor is considered cheap, but in the human economy, that you end up with a lot of people at the bottom who do a lot of hard work that we all rely upon to work, but it doesn't when people don't show up for those things. And I don't blame them for not showing up, and I think that it's been structured in a way, talking about the World Economic Forum for a second, so that the people at the bottom are considered disposable, and that's something we see that has been an ongoing thing. So let me share a little bit of a little conspiracy theory rabbit hole for you to take a look at for 2 or 3 minutes, which is an interesting backdrop to the larger story I want to tell today. I've recently become acquainted with this movement called Technocracy, and there was a gentleman who was the primary speaker. His name was Howard Scott, not Scott Howard, our good friend of the program and an excellent author, but Howard Scott, who went around in the late 20s and early 30s. I think the movement peaked about 32, 33, as the Great Depression was ongoing, and rather than being a political movement like we think of, their argument was essentially that the way we need to think of the economy and governance social structures of the future is to optimize the energetic outputs of all of society and minimize the energetic inputs. So what am I saying by that? I'm taking a really interesting but frighteningly autistic speech and saying that they reduced it to this idea that the way civilization advances and all the technology that makes our life happy is because we find ways to produce more energy so we don't have to actually do things. It's like the ultimate lazy philosophy, right? In a lot of ways. But what you want to do is you want to reduce human consumption to the point where we can realize our preferences with the absolute minimal output of energy, including for the sake of, even if you could, reduce our physical caloric needs, because they made an argument that a lot of what we tried to do in history was basically the calories we needed to consume to feed ourselves. Something I understand all too well as a homesteader. And they said that society was advancing specifically because it got all these different machines to work for it, and that they were working to get this faster and faster. And they said governments would not do it. So what would be needed would be a coalition of people who would come together and who would change society so they function this way. So in their model, governments would become redundant and sort of irrelevant. Social values, they called them, what do they call them? Axialists, they called them, people who were worried about things that didn't matter anymore, because in their world it was like what you could produce and what you could consume. And I use those words very specifically because it's going to be relevant to the story today. We think of producers and consumers in the economy to this day, and a consumer is a recipient, and a recipient is someone who takes it. And if you're a consumer, you're taking what they give you, right? You're taking what the system offers. You are a passive observer, and you're used to thinking of ourselves as buyers, but we're really consumers. And the fact that they don't refer to us as the buyers but consumers tells you a lot about how you're seen under the present economy. Whereas as producers, they're the ones who make the content. And whether it's that in the social economy that's evolving, which is frankly, just as much currency because it's just as arbitrary as it does the industrial economy, the basic model is they are shaping the directional flows of how society works and that we are going along with it. All right, so keep that in mind. Technocracy started working with this, and there was a guy by the name of Haldeman who was pretty high up in this, one of the heavies in Canada, grandfather of Elon Musk. That's how I learned about this. And this was something you didn't hear about, but it was a movement that got tons of money. It was like the original NGO. And as we've seen so often, and as you've seen at Davos and other places, using the media, using corporations, woke corporatism, and using these non-governmental organizations, we've seen that government has often been rendered irrelevant. Pick an easy example today. Senator Marsha Blackburn, Rick Wiles was talking about this. She goes on and says she wants to critique this idea of having trannies in women's sports. And Facebook won't let her do it because they say it's hate speech. So basically, a corporation has more power over what is said in the public fora because the courts look the other way, as they always do, than a senator does. And that we, who have been making sane statements for a very long time, have been so censored. But the reason that works is because you have these interlocking institutions that exist to prevent people from saying things that exist outside of what's permitted. So, with all that in your mind, let's talk about unorthodox economics and why I say get woke or go broke. The way most people think of corporations and economics works a bit like this, or any business for that matter, that they produce goods and that their success, viability, profit is based upon the amount they can sell to consumers who pay money, and therefore the primary consideration of the selling entity, whether it be a corporation, small business, whatever it is, should be to satisfy the needs of the consumer in terms of providing them the content, material, service, and to not piss them off so much that they boycott them because they disagree with their beliefs, okay? That's basically how most people think, and that's how you're sort of taught economics works. But the truth of it is, it's actually backwards, and a lot of it has to do with the way money works. Let's think back to when COVID first broke out and why certain businesses stayed open and why certain businesses were closed. The big businesses were deemed too big to fail, got helicopter money that came in, which is to say the resources of society as controlled by the debt management agencies of the banks, who directly and indirectly control the flows of money from the government, both the future and the present, based on fiscal policy as well as monetary policy, and mostly debt management, made the decision that they were going to give a whole bunch of money, basically interest-free, to big corporations, and the big corporations were thought and told they needed to be in compliance, which is why we saw the very weird thing that in the most massive unemployment development in American history, which is what happened when the COVID lockdowns began during the Trump administration, we also saw the stock market, after an initial shuffle, made the biggest bounce in history, rising upwards. And why was that? That was because money was inserted directly from the Fed through different laundering institutions. And I'm bored to get into those today. But it basically got in the hands of corporations. The corporations, what they did was, the promise that was made to the people is this is needed to keep the economy going. And a little bit of money was thrown into infrastructure, kind of like the $40 billion going to Ukraine. Only $6 billion of it's going to Ukraine. $35 billion of it's going to the American military, the military contractors and whatnot. Okay, so the same sort of thing happened there, and they did something called stock buybacks. And stock buybacks are pretty simple. It's a pyramid scheme, if you know, it's money laundering. What ends up happening is the helicopter money comes in from the Federal Reserve through entities like BlackRock, like Vanguard, State Street, all that. They're told, hey, you can get these loans where you don't even have to pay them back, or zero interest or whatever. They take the loans, they buy the stock price up, and then they sell it, so they make the money out of thin air, impoverishing and destroying their competition. So now there's only big woke corporatism to go with big woke government, right? And what ends up happening is you end up having a couple companies that survive, they're too big to fail, with money that was made out of thin air, and the stock prices were artificially inflated. And we say, oh, well, they made money, they were successful, they were profitable. But the catch in the system is money has an arbitrary value. Fiat currency has no limits on how much they can produce. The only real value to it, if you really get down to it, if you want to say in a relativistic sense, is who gets it first has the most value. That's why the Fed has all the control, because really what it is it's the substitution of a monetary cipher of value for something that's a real produced good or service, or a behavior that's considered to be useful. And so the behavior that was put forward is we're going to help big business instead of small business, and we're going to go ahead and take care of their needs so that they had a bunch of money and that we would give them certain rules. Okay. Let's go back before that. So the way we think of things is that businesses exist to make profits, and those profits are then sent back to the shareholders. And that the way the American system, good to see you, Corey, and God bless all you who are here today. The way it actually worked in the American system, since about the 1960s, actually, and maybe it goes back even further, because I don't know every detail of the history of it. But we always think of how corporations do charitable contributions, right? And the way that's presented as the way they want you to believe is we're good people, help us and support us, we give our money away. The way other people think of it in the corporations is that, well, this is cheaper than actual marketing, and it gets us free publicity from the media who says nice things about us, so people will want to shop here. They literally used to spend millions and millions of dollars test marketing what was the most popular issue, and it turned out it was breast cancer, mainly because women love their breasts and so do men, and it's not a controversial issue like, for instance, if you gave money to AIDS, that had certain connotations attached to it. So for a long time, marketing was about taking the bland issue where you help people, where there's no possible misinterpretation of it. So that's what the corporations thought they were doing. A lot of your HR people, your marketers think that way. But in reality, what it was also and more deeply about was, if you think about the way the tax code was set up, where corporations get taxed like crazy on any profits, to the point where anyone who's ever owned a small business knows your goal is to make zero profit, what corporations were basically incentivized into doing was to create nonprofit entities that were designed to shape culture, because they would be given the tax benefit of not having to pay on what they were doing, and that this was the price of being able to be considered for the capital flows that they relied upon to survive. And this was something that was slowly rolled out, but by the time 2008 came in and you saw social stakeholder capitalism, the stuff Larry Fink loves to talk about, and the way woke venture capital happened at Silicon Valley, basically the deal was this. Corporations, like, think of a good example of this. Think of Netflix or Disney or any of these entities that basically has been going out there putting crap content in front of you that nobody wants, and you keep wondering, how are they doing this? How can they be making money when they're selling things nobody wants? Well, that's not really true. What's true is the people who make the money want this content out there. So what they do is they use their Fed printing powers, okay, that has been anesthetized and sanitized by the Treasury. They have been taking this money that they get for free. Remember, this is how they get it. They don't have to pay any for it. They make it up however they want, and they're allowed to do that. If they wanted to put $1 billion in your bank account today, they could do it. And you know what? It wouldn't even mean a thing, and you wouldn't be able to say anything about it. So they went to all these companies, and they said, okay, well, here's what you're going to do. If you don't want us to sick our dogs on you, you will invest your profits. That's what basically happened, into our social structure, and in doing that, you will be allowed to have your space in the hierarchy where you can make your money. But when you wonder where those huge corporate profits go, oh, we gave billions of dollars to charity. Okay, so charity's a word, when you hear it at first, it conjures up a really nice feeling. Hey, I'm helping at a church picnic, I'm taking care of some hungry people. But you start looking into the weeds of where the non-governmental spending was. My old friend John Q. Publius used to write about this a lot. And you look into where that money actually goes, and what you find out is that corporations overwhelmingly were putting money into the cultural model that is basically endorsing globalism. That's international institutions, things like the World Health Organization, all of these entities that we hate. The World Economic Forum, it was a forum for business leaders to get together and talk. It was a forum where the bankers came to tell the business people, this is what we want so we can have direct control as technology comes through, in the sort of technocratic vision, a la, Howard Scott, where we want to have machines do more, people do less, and that we are able, therefore, to control you. And the price of you being considered as a woke corporation is you have to put out these ideas, because otherwise you'll be blacklisted. And the blacklisting that happens, think of someone like every now and then you see corporations go out. Chick-fil-A was one, Cracker Barrel for a little while, they were standing up. Of course, then they slid on it. And people are like, hey, why don't more people stand up? And the reason why is when you stand up, you get kicked out from venture capital. And that cancellation of the entities that were not wanted has been at the heart of this story for a very long time. What you have to basically understand is corporations are not paying their taxes to the government. Government regulates in a hostile way corporations which don't follow the woke agenda, because government, just like corporations, is dependent on the banking system that's funding them both. And if you can understand that inversion of what you're thinking, you think the corporation should answer to you because you're paying for their goods, but you're paying for their goods with that money that has no arbitrary value. And if you give them $1,000, $10,000, $1 million in business, whatever it is, however big you think you are, the bankers just say, okay, well, we can print money out of thin air, which is why the way this system system works, you never see them care about how much they lose, because if they're doing the right things and they're big enough, too big to fail is literally their way of saying these are the monopolistic institutions by which we're going to control culture, technology, and it's the loss leader that they accept, the bankers, so that they are able to perpetuate their system at the root of it, where money has no intrinsic value, but that you believe it does and they believe it does, because you have these things working in a fashion where essentially it's the inverse of what people actually think. And this is the unorthodox economics of it. That because money is a completely arbitrary value, whoever can just have it first and have it most can literally conjure it up out of thin air and, like a spell of a sorcerer, say, you're going to do what we want. And they call it charity so that you don't ask questions. And they say we're doing this to displace taxes, but you can't do that. Corporations can. They're legal fictions that never are going to be able to be held to account. So I want you to understand this. Now, let me take 1 second to say hi to everyone who's coming in here. Free Green, good to see you. Appreciate you, sir. We got Patrick in here. Corey, good to see you. Rooster writes, America's a corporation. You know, you hear that. You hear about the life insurance things and the admiralty law. It could be. Corey, good to see you. Tim, glad you are here with us as well. So, and you're talking social financial hypergamy economics by Aaron Russo. Aaron Russo was a brilliant man, but the point I want to get through this is a lot of you understand this stuff already, but the thing a lot of people don't understand that I want to be very, very clear about is that you have to understand the charitable write-off is the globalist tax. Okay, if you want to see, they're not paying taxes to the government anymore. They're basically paying to get to zero profit, which is a regulatory requirement, so they don't get punished heavily. And the way they do that is by giving their money away so that none of them make money. And they're allowed to make whatever they want off the top, whatever they can get away with in terms of their profits, in terms of income and salary. And often they run a simple scam that goes like this, where the leadership of these companies get to make more income dependent on what the stock price, because they get stock shares and they get incentive for high prices. So the helicopter money comes in, the share goes from 40 to 60, the CEO cashes out at 60, plus he gets a bonus for the fact it went up to 60, but it's all fake money and it's laundering of a hyperinflationary system. And that's why we've gotten to the point where the money doesn't buy anything anymore, because it was always a fiction, but it was a fiction used for control to buy time as long as they could until a more technological surveillance grid could be put into place, or where people themselves would end up superfluous in the equation, which is where we're at now, where we're seeing the correction from that happen between debt, happen between the way that they're looking at wars, the potential famine out down the line, and basically the discarding of the lower elements of society that people have become okay with because they present it in a term that seems utterly reasonable. And people don't understand this. So people rage about the wrong things. People rage about government needs to make rules. It's the fact that governments make rules about things they shouldn't be involved in that allows corporations to run the scam. So the irony you begin to understand is the very people who are most, how should I say, empathetic to these problems often support and enable the institutions that make their own degradation and subjugation complete. And it's absolutely maddening. And I know that if you don't have a head for finance, this is basically tricky. But the super, super, super simple version of understanding it is that the money they're giving away for free, that's the loss leader. That's the marketing. That's the price of putting in a culture. And if you look over the course of the last few years, go look at Fortune 500 companies. Look at how many billions of dollars they have invested into social causes that are acceptable, and how the banks have basically in the last 13 years taken a direct lever and said, you are going to put your money here, you are going to put your money there, you are going to put your money there. And why'd they do that? For the defense of their own society, because the old debt-based scam that they ran wasn't efficient enough and the debts were piling up too high. So they had to come up with something else to buy other time, and they had to re-engineer the way people thought. And that's why you see all these entities that are willing to go out there and put terrible ideas out there, ranging to not just, and when we're talking about things like the IMF who respond to the same bankers, we're not just talking about people being subject to these pressures. We got to talk about whole governments being subject to them. I mean, the history of Argentina since 1990 is nothing if not a study of this same phenomenon. So it's something I want to encourage you all to take a much deeper look into to understand more fully what has been happening out there. Because I think we're getting to a point where the great reset that's happening has been that the control of the economy, I mean, functionally, those three funds, Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock, which basically were funnels for how the government, I want to say this right, the bankers and the government work together to help the oligarchs get control of the economy directly through profitable assets by destroying all their competition so you can't stand against them, and by theoretically controlling a nominal share of 30% of the economy, where this is going to end up by 2030. So that's how you can do the Build Back Better, and you will own nothing and you will love it. They will take care of everyone at a certain preordained subsistence level, but you will not have any functional autonomy anymore. And if you exist outside that, that's what the social credit score is all about, to force people into compliance. And they reduce, and marginalize. And we're seeing this is already in place. This isn't something that's going to happen. This is something that has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen. So how do we offer resistance to this? I worked for Ron Paul, and the man said something once: you can't change anything in America until you change the way money works. So one of the things we really have to think about, and there is an emphasis that I bring up often in Pineland, despite the fact that I know it's not the most entertaining topic for everybody, is you got to change it. You got to take away the power from the money lenders. You got to pull a Jesus, go in there and knock their table over and call them hypocrites. They talk about how much they care about the poor, and yet they make money out of thin air. And they could give it to anyone they want, and they do. And that's why you can't. And people get so mad. They're like, these people are robbing the system. They're taking $200. They're taking $500. They're taking $2 billion, writing their stocks up and saying, I'm a good businessman. It's all a shell game, man. It's a con. It ain't real, but the power we give them is real. And because they realize something we don't. We are obsessed with materiality. But you know what? If you know the old, was it the Heisenberg uncertainty principle? An object, what was I going to say? You can look at an object's, you can judge its motion or you can judge its mass, but you can't do both at the same time. It's just impossible. We look at the mass of things. We look at the materiality. We are standing still, and they are running circles around us with the one coin moving so fast. We're chasing this one fake coin, thinking there's a million coins or there's all this wealth. And if they do it at just the right rate, you can start to see the individual coins in your eyes play a trick on you. And you're thinking, hey, there's all this money out there. But it's not. It was never real. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. I mean, are there assets? Yeah. And what they do is they get control. You work, you put your sweat equity, your labor into the assets, you develop them, and they give you coins. And they give you lots of coins, and they give you little certificates for the coins. But are they real? No. They're not. They never were. And they give their friends them so they can take advantage of you, because anyone, and this is why the system works, anyone who's smart enough to understand it can be part of the hustle. If you're really smart, and you are willing to be a part of it, maybe they even make you in charge of it and say, hey, welcome to the club. But you know what it isn't? It doesn't take care of people. And ultimately, at some point, the bottom falls out, because you can't have something from nothing forever. Even if you have all the velocity, inertia is a thing, but so is friction. And the friction we're running into, where everyone just can't be comfortable anymore, where you can't get cheap food, and where the people are going hungry, and where the debts are too high, and you put too many things off, where people who desperately want to look the other way don't know how to. Well, then that whole society breaks, and you got to do something else. And so, you end up with that. You end up with tyranny. You end up with someone who has control, having all the stuff saying, do this or I will hurt you. And hurt you might be a little more humane in these days. It might be, we just won't let you work a job because you didn't get jabbed. It could be, we won't let you ride the subway because you had the wrong opinion last week. That happens in China. We will monitor everything you do, and we'll help you. It's for your own good. We're from the government. We're here to help. But the government's as much a hostage as anything else. The government was taken over, by the time the Fed passed, the history, you could read the history of the first 150 years of the American experiment, post-revolution, as an effort between 140 years, between trying to have a bank and not trying to have a bank, and what the bankers did, how the bankers were involved at the very beginning, how Hamilton kneecapped Adams, how Jackson struck back against Biddle, how Lincoln basically gets maneuvered, the South gets maneuvered into that Civil War, to the assassination of McKinley. All of these little pieces, you can start putting them together, and you can understand these pieces that happen. And then eventually what they do, they run a third-party candidate in Teddy Roosevelt, and you get Hoover in there, and you get the Fed, and you get the IRS, and you get the taxes, and now where are you? You own nothing and you love it. In America, in the year 1910, you didn't pay a tax on your land. You just lived on it. Or if you did, it was a very, very small tax that was completely nominal. Good to see you, Shalom girl. You picked where your kids went to school, right? There wasn't a federal income tax. There wasn't a federal wage tax. There was more prosperity created in America between the post-Civil War boom and 1910 than at any point in the country's history. The FDR didn't make it any better. The government just started getting control of it and started putting in the pension systems that impoverished people around it. And look, I'm not here to speak for robber baron capitalism. There were problems with it. There's no doubt about it. And the unions stood up against it. And you know what? They fought, and there were ugly fights. And the unions clawed out a piece for themselves, and the corporations had a piece. And hey, that's fine. That's politics. I'm not here to take a side. What I am here to say is that the minute you give control of your money supply away, I mean, you can go back. New England was impoverished in the 1630s when the British East India Company started getting involved and said, you will have to use our pounds instead of their own money. Benjamin Franklin was writing in the 1760s, friend and one-time protege of Cotton Mather. People don't know that either, who was writing about the root cause of the American discontent was not in the Stamp Act and not in the Sugar Act and not in these things. They were nuisances, no doubt. People didn't like them, but it was in not having to have their own colonial script, because when the states couldn't make their own money, they had to buy someone else's, and that was expensive. And in the same way that a third world country suffers when they have to buy U.S. dollars, the whole world was that way. And the U.S. citizens' great productive capacity, amazing wealth, power, and energy in this land was harnessed and stolen, not by the government, but by the banks. And the banks used the government to be their bully boys. And we accept that because they put out ideas about justice. They put out ideas about societal structuring. And they propagandize you. I mean, what do you think TV is? Why do you think they invested in media so heavily? They wanted to propaganda. Why do you think they put electricity in? I mean, we were freer. If the point of government is freedom and liberty, technology is the opposite of it. Technology is the bondage to the idea that you must be your most efficient self at all times. And whatever prices you pay morally and mentally along the way, you have to pay them, whether that is in working 60 hours a week, whether that's in taking drugs so you go sane, whether it's in unhealthy lifestyle balances. And you do this all because you're like, hey, I have to work to pay my bills. Well, why do you have to pay your bills? Because money is creating this constant debt because of how they have it structured. And before that, look, money always exists. You have a means of exchange. I get that. But the fiat-based systems are so corrupt, and even the gold and silver ones were not as good as you would probably think, but they were better. There's no doubt they were better. And what I encourage you to understand in this is I'm not telling you the perfect solution to this. These are problems. The problem of how you get people to do things when they don't want to, and how you get societies to act when people are inherently lazy, is a difficult one. It turns out, like Adam Smith said, greed is an amazing profit motive. And what some of the Scots like Smith and Hume talked about, and that was picked up really by the utilitarians like John Stuart Mill, people who are dismal. I mean, that's what they call economics, the dismal science. But like I've told you often, economics is the explanation of feelings and why we chase them. So if you understand the backgrounds of this and why greed as a profit motive works, it's because our worst traits have been weaponized against us to mobilize us to act in society thinking we are going to have short-term benefit, essentially at the expense of others. And we've presented it as a good to try to make ourselves feel better. A lot of propaganda has gone forward to that extent, but at this point, it's not really in self-interest. It's in competitive interest, and that engine is continually stoked by the discontent of the dialectic, where we are set one against each other. And it doesn't have to be, we like to pick the big things, left versus right, but poor versus rich works just as well. The rich are terrified of being poor. The poor are envious of the rich. The middle are scared to fall off. And in Europe, they talk much more about this because class warfare, when they had aristocrats who had to kind of buy into the system because it worked there, went and followed this, you would begin seeing that there's always those divisions that are being exacerbated deliberately so that people are mobilized to work because they want what they don't have. And what is the opposite of that? I guess it has to be a society based on contentment. So when you look at happy and free societies, what do you notice? They're poor, they're agrarian. If you have a bunch of farmers who spend all their time working their land and they do make their living off their land, yeah, they'll trade. There'll be a shopkeeper in town. You need a guy who can shoe the horses. You need a guy who can do things. And it doesn't have to be low tech. I just use that because it's an easier example in our mind's eye than what a high tech version of this would look like. Not that can't exist. I know people are working on it. That's why they have time banks and some of the stuff I know Free Green and others have experimented with. But the purpose of society in that world is contentment. It's not acquisition of materials. It's not competitive struggling. It's the assertion of an essential purpose, which is to say a way of being, as opposed to an existential purpose, which is a way of doing. And in the West, and this is what I've kind of argued in broad strokes in my books, at least the last 3 or 4, since basically the Renaissance, we've been in an existential mindset where we've decided what we do is more important than who we are. And we are seeing a shift back to essentialism. Who we are is what matters most. And the argument that the globalists are making, you can be whatever you want to be as long as you give us power in the system. And that's going to be a powerful argument because the existential system has bankrupted itself. And we've realized after doing all we can do, we're still stuck with ourselves and we still have to deal with our own feelings, emotions, our purpose, and meaning in this world. So the battle of who's going to stand against this is not going to be existential. There's not a system, there's not an ideology, there's not a better way to put this together. This is a core problem that's a half millennium old. It's going to have to be an essential thing. Who are we? Are we our technology? Are we our energy consumption? Are we just whatever our aesthetic preferences? Where if you would load us in, and they're going to be able to provide that, where you can live in a perfect fantasy. Or are we something more than that? And that's what the resistance is going to be upon. That's why you see God coming back into the political discourse. Because people say, no, we have souls and there's purpose to this and there's meaning to this. And the limitations that exist in this world have an instructive purpose. And therefore, we need to stand for them and recognize that nature and its limitations are not a restraint upon us that must be overcome, but rather a blessing that must be embraced in a way where we begin to discover our essential nature. And we stand for that because that is our path to salvation, if you want to think of it, or at least if you're not willing to go that far, at least to say that that's where the better life lies. And these things all happen, but the way the system has been able to trick people away from being happy and content is to be say you could have more, but you're not because you're just not working hard enough. And they always dangle the carrot in front of you saying you're going to be rich. And if you get rich enough in the game, you begin to see this. And then the price is you have to continue perpetuating the lie. So the big lie, you wonder why so many people believe the big lie and why Goebbels said that the big lie is the thing that never gets contested. The reason is because there's too many people who are in on it. And the people who are in on it are the ones at the top because there's always a hierarchy. They just pretend there isn't, which is why you have woke corporatism by the wealthiest people who do the complete opposite of what the people at the bottom say, go forward because it prevents the conflict where the people who are actually in charge ever get challenged. That's the way economic society and culture, to the best of my knowledge and observation, take it for what it's worth, actually functions. So I hope maybe you got something of value from that. Definitely was something I wanted to share with you all and something to keep in mind for the days ahead because a lot of people, what are you investing into? Are you investing into currencies, pseudo-currencies, new currencies, assets in terms of like gold, silver, which is fine. I mean, it's going to have some value. I don't doubt that. And it's certainly better than fiat. But are you investing into actual fixed goods and what are you seeking in terms of your independence? Because if you're not seeking that and you're seeking to play by the system, remember, it's like playing against the house in the casino or playing against a computer, where the AI can spawn as many units as it wants to. You can't win that battle because they have an infinite amount of control. That's a bit like the equation 1/0. It's undefined. It is literally undefined, and that's the power of it. The power of the magician is to take that which is undefined and define it and create the illusion of solidity because our intuition is there has to be something there. If everyone is accepting these dollars, they must have value, but they don't. But you're convinced because everyone else is. And the consequences, and look, the consequences of not supporting this are very real, but you know it's fake because I'll tell you the truth. If things got to the end and someone offered you $1 billion and all you had left was a Twinkie and that was the last Twinkie in the world, it wouldn't be worth dick. It's the reality of it. And people don't understand that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into the way the world actually functions versus the way people think it functions, and understanding that the control that happens is in shaping and influencing the opinions of others, which is why I do what I do now. I'm not trying to get money. I'm up here way at the top, trying to trickle down big ideas to you so that you understand what it is you're seeking in your own liberation and what we collectively are seeking in our liberation from a system that I would argue doesn't serve our interests. And look, does that make it incumbent on us to present an alternative? At least we should try. And are there benefits? Are there benefits to material progress? Are there benefits to technology? Sure, of course there are. But the price we're paying is starting to get pretty heavy. And what I'm asking is for all the toys and stuff you have, if you're giving away complete control about choice in your life to others, if that's a price you're willing to pay. The reality is history has demonstrated most people will. And the more desperate conditions are, the more likely they are to go along with it. So if you're going to be a holdout, you have to be thinking extra hard about what the price of it is and hope ironically, that the people who are in charge of this have screwed up badly enough where they can't pull off what they're trying to do. And if they can't do it, I will tell you how they're going to square the difference. If they can't bring all of society along with their new plan so they can have direct control, they will expunge as many people as they want. And we think they're going to come after us. But the last few years have demonstrated that's not really true. They just want to silence us from being able to talk to the masses or reach more people who are going to be problems for them to deal with later. Just like us, their problem is also the herd. And when it comes to the herd, what they're going to do is send them trampling after us. So therefore, we think that they're their enemy. But it's more like the fact that we're the threat because we are going to be here when it's all done, just like they are. And there might be a grand reconciliation. I mean, that's always been suggested by elites. And that's why you see so many people. You find, oh, they were working with them all along. Now, I'm not one of those people, but there's a lot of people who do. And you have to be aware of that. And you have to be, and that's why, for me, that's why I do my preaching. I look at this as a spiritual battle, that the liberation of people, even for people who don't really, who unfortunately freely give it away. But these are the battles of our times that people don't even know are happening. And what you would expect to see is that if the change of the world isn't working because too many people can't be brought along to the new world order, whatever it ends up being, that they'll just kill however many they have to, because that's what utopians always do. They did it in the Soviet Union. They did it in China. They did it in France. We could pick lots of countries that this happened in. And it's going to happen again. And it's going to keep happening because people have this idea that there's a perfect system, thinking that the existential view, the world around us, shaping us, is how we make the better man. Whereas the essentialists have always said, hey, let's look inside and ask the questions. So you're either asking questions or giving answers. Here in this program, I've given enough answers for a lifetime. I'm here to ask some questions. But we're going to ask smart questions, and hopefully we find one another and support each other in that larger effort. And I hope you appreciate that and you're a part of it. If you like some of the work that's doing and you like the way I think, go check out some of the books over on Amazon. Or support the program, the Venmo, CVC, PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake 04739. Other than that, I didn't see a lot in the news that I wanted to jump at, just the same sort of stuff that's been ongoing. We'll keep an eye on it, definitely watching out what's happening going for the future. Always have those concerns, but it's a nice spring day. I didn't get as far ahead on my chores, so I'm going to go play with the chickens. We will, what I am going to try to do? I was talking with the wife about this, and I don't know if I'm the guy to do it, so maybe we'll have to have some other people together. But I want to talk about the import of fire. Civilization really started with fire. If you believe the esoteric interpretations, Prometheus stole the sacred fire, all these sort of stories out there. But fire is at the heart of how we build our society. And it turns out when things go down, people understand water, they understand food, but controlling fire is basically the first step up between primitivism and barbarism, because it means you don't freeze, you don't have to wander, you can be comfortable in your place. So we're going to think about ways to create energy by having a better understanding of fire, and I'm going to share some of the things I've had to learn about wood, about coal, about stoves, about different ways to look, because in terms of your own medium to long-term planning, if what they're broadcasting about brownouts, about blackouts, about energy shortages ends up being a real issue, or it's just you're priced out of it, learning how to use nature around you to stay warm is really, or to keep cool if you have to. I mean, honestly, then you're talking about water and blankets and warm environments and how you build. But really, we're mostly Northerners in this chat, or people who at least have to deal with a winter that's more of a threat for survival than summer. So we'll talk about that a little bit. That's something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of my own preparedness and my homesteading. Other than that, I just want to say thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today, indulging me to have a little chat. If you have any comments, please make them in the comment box. I want to say we appreciate all of you. Thank Corey for his moderating job. And Dana would say hi too as well. She's not feeling very well today. She worked really hard yesterday. I mean, my wife, one of the things that frustrates me is, you guys know my wife is pretty sick, and she does more with the 10% of health she has than 90% of people. And, it's a shame more people didn't do that. One of the things you learn if you're speaking truth or trying to live a better life in this world is that things don't happen because you don't need a lot of people to make things good. But so many people are not willing to do anything. And so many people do things that are self-harming that it just becomes impossible to save people. And you try to help them and you try to give them the word, but basically, in the end, you realize all you can do is get out of their way. The elites actually recognize it. I think we actually struggle with that more than they do. But we should get out of the way, but not in the sense of saying that we're just going to be all individuals, but understand that the contest is on and the Pinelanders have to find a way to protect one another. We don't have to win. We just have to make sure they don't win either, and so we can live the way we want to live. And if we're left alone in, what do I call it, splendid isolation, the proper English way, right? That the Gulf, the Channel rather, protected them. Maybe we can do the same thing for ourselves. So hopefully, yeah, please, your prayers for Dana and for her health or recovery. She's working hard and doing what she can. I wish I could do more. I mean, the thing that sucks for me, just there's so many things. Like, the hardest thing is there's so many things that we would do, but neither she nor I have the energy to do it, and we push each other sometimes, and we push each other so hard that sometimes we snap a little bit, and it's just it's. But that's one other thing too. Ultimately, you cannot prepare for everything, and bringing the load. It's just like if you tried to run a marathon as a sprint, you can't do it. You got to pace yourself a little bit because keeping your mental health sane is important. Last thing, I'll give you an Eddie update. We had a long conversation last night. Dana and I were talking about that, and we're thinking, is that Rooster really going to survive because he's doing these things? And I swear to God, this morning I come down there because we had a conversation about potentially culling him. I'm not saying I'm going to, but and I didn't say anything to him. I didn't behave anything. He was sitting in the corner so meek and so quiet. I'm telling you, animals just know. And if he understands and has gotten the, I don't know what you'd say, if he's managed to pick up on the message in the ether, the Rooster knows. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't want to become a drumstick, otherwise he's going to be Sir Capon. You know what I'm saying? So we'll see how that all works out. But for the moment, he's being good today. I think maybe because it's warmer, the chickens are all having a dust bath. So we'll see how that all works out. But like I said, thank you everyone for coming in. Lord's blessing be upon you all. I am Tom Kaczynski. Thank you for supporting me for the program. And Pinelander out. You guys have a good one.